I'm Burke Allen from Allen Media Strategies, and our guest today is Nasir Shansab. He's the author of the book Silent Trees, and if you haven't picked up a copy, we have copies available for you. Jessica has those, so if you can raise your hand, we'll be happy to bring you a complimentary copy of the book and also a copy of our presser if you need that today as well. We'll also make them available on the table out front. We're very proud to work with Nasir, and one of the reasons that we like what Nasir has to say, in addition to this wonderful fiction novel that he's written about Afghanistan, is that Nasir isn't beholden to any interest when it comes to his home country of Afghanistan. He's not beholden to the military of either country, the government of either country. He has a deep and abiding love for the people of his home country, and that's what drives Nasir to work so hard for the Afghan people. Ladies and gentlemen, Nasir Shansab.
Thank you very much, Bert, for that wonderful introduction. I thought I'll give you a few points of what I think about the situation in Afghanistan. And then we will just have time to questions and answers. I think that would be more lively. What I think is that Afghanistan today is essentially the same failed state that it was in 2001 when the United States invaded it. The marginal advances in women's rights and education do not have permanency. If the Taliban come back or civil war descends on the country, those advances will vanish quite rapidly. Once the US and NATO departs from Afghanistan, the likely scenario is, in my view, that the country will be de facto split in two parts. I think the Taliban will take over the southern part of the country, the eastern part of the country, the so-called Pashtun belt, where the Pashtuns live mainly, and the other minorities, like the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, and the Tajiks, they will go to the north, and the Hindu Kush mountain range will be sort of a natural border between them. But I think that a low-intensity war will continue for many, many years to come between the two parts of the country. I think the Afghan government, as well as the US-led international community, is responsible, bears the responsibility for what is happening in Afghanistan, for the fact that Afghanistan has remained a failed state. Endemic corruption, utter lawlessness, and government incompetence have pushed Afghanistan to the brink of disaster. Deteriorating security and government failure to plan and execute the country's economic and institutional reconstruction have left the great majority of the population under arbitrary rule and mired them in abject poverty. And that is one reason why we are losing the majority of the Afghans to be on our side. And the phenomenal growth of poppy cultivation and opium trade took place under the very noses of 100,000 very well armed and very well trained international forces. And the tragedy of the story is that in the year 2001, Afghanistan produced about 200 tons of opium. Today, Afghanistan is producing almost 9,000 tons of opium. So the opium trade and the opium cultivation was quite a success story. At least Afghanistan is number one in one thing. The absence of the rule of law, a productive economy based on private enterprise, did not develop jobs and created and tried to create, to ease the enormously high rate of unemployment. As a result, Afghanistan has not evolved into a functioning state. Democracy never had a chance to take root. Without exception, the country's elections were rigged, allowing the worst elements of society to rise to the top. Warlords have retained their power. Institutions have stayed weak and ineffective. The government is infested with corruption and nepotism. I would like to come back to the international community and why, and say why the international community bears a responsibility also. The US-led coalition of nations present in Afghanistan has to be blamed partly for what is happening in Afghanistan. It installed the current government, the current leadership. It financed sham elections. It lectured against corruption, but when it came to do something about it, walked away from it. So I think the result is that Afghanistan is a failed state, and the United States is in danger of losing the war. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll open up for questions in just a moment. I do want to recognize some folks who are here with us today. Jeremy Kay, the publisher of Silent Trees, is here, along with Will Bauer and Anita Crane, Jessica Lloyd from Allen Media Strategies. And we've been working very hard to help get Nasir out there into the press and the national and international community, because I think he has a very unique insight. He travels back in country on a regular basis, just returned from there, and during that trip also spoke at Parliament. And not just here in Washington, D.C. are folks interested in his take on things. And I'd like to ask you, Nasir, about your experience with Parliament and how your message on Afghanistan was received there. If you could answer in the mic, please.
I think they were very cooperative, and I was quite surprised by it. I went to the so-called Complaint Commission of the Senate and talked to them for about an hour. They invited me to come back the next day, and we talked again for about an hour. And I specifically complained about one large project, which is a mining project. And they ordered the Minister of Mines to come the next week and face me. And the minister did. He came with quite a large number of people. They simply lied. And they couldn't answer my questions, and they simply lied. And I said they lied, and I said they lied, and ultimately I got a little bit mad and smashed my fist on the table, and some water bottles fell down. And the minister then agreed to meet me in his office and discuss things. And we did meet in the office, and he has asked me to come back and present my case to the ministry, because he's a new minister, and he will probably bring in new people. So that was actually a good experience, a really good experience.
Why should everyday Americans care what happens in Afghanistan? With all due respect, it is your home country. You have a long family history there. Your family's been leading industrialist for many, many years. But why should the truck driver in Peoria care what happens over there?
Well, he may not know where Afghanistan is. But in general, I think we have to be concerned as human beings what happens with humans actually anywhere in the world. I remember that Prime Minister Chamberlain from Britain went to visit Hitler and signed an agreement with him and came back and said, we have peace in the world and we are not going to go to war for a small, far-off country, meaning then Czechoslovakia. Afghanistan is no longer the last corner of the world. Physically it might be, but in reality we have become very interdependent and the world has become very small. And I believe if there's real trouble in one corner of the world, we don't have security in our own place. And I think this is reason enough to be interested in what is happening in Afghanistan.
I've asked a friend, Chris Osborne, to join us today to moderate and to ask some questions. He's uniquely qualified to do this. Chris was an anchor for many years with CNN and Headline News and is now a defense correspondent for military.com. So Chris, if you could come up and get us started. Chris Osborne, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Burke. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome an opportunity to discuss such an interesting topic. Look forward to reading Silent Trees. I guess a couple of quick thoughts were, in addition to your very interesting opening remarks, were there a couple of takeaways in terms of what you would, perhaps to further inspire those who might want to read your book, in terms of what they might learn or bring away from the experience of reading Silent Trees?
I had written in 1978 a piece of analysis trying to analyze what happens in dictatorships, in people under dictatorships. I had concluded then that ultimately the dictator is destroyed, and those people who oppose the dictatorship get destroyed, and but tragically also the general population who have nothing to do with the dictatorship. They just want to have their lives and live peacefully, and they get destroyed. When the Soviet Union disintegrated and communism collapsed, I saw how the misery that took over the lives of the average Russian, especially the people who lived on a fixed income, the money lost its value, and they had to take their own possessions to the roadside and sell it and try to sell it to be able to survive. And I thought, well, this might be a good story, and I tried. I thought, let me write it again. I had written it in German, actually. I was in Germany then in Heidelberg, and then I thought that a piece of analysis is not being read widely enough. Some people who are interested in it read it, and most other people won't read it. So I decided to fictionalize it. I didn't know how hard it would be. It took me a very long time to do it, but I persevered and wrote it. What I'm trying to do with the book is to show in the context of a human story what lack of freedom and living under a dictatorship does to people, how it forms them, what it makes out of their lives, and how it actually affects their relationship to others and ultimately brings that collapse and total destruction, which in Afghanistan is a good example, a life example of it.
Well, I really like that explanation, and I like Burke's question about relevance. And I was going to ask about inspiration for the book, but you anticipated that question and addressed that very nicely. We'll see who else has questions in a second. But first, one last quick question, which is, you talked about how things could devolve quickly into further chaos, further violence. What is it about the current government that is so tenuous, that is so, in your view, unstable, that might further unravel once there's a larger withdrawal?
The government is very corrupt. They have never tried to help the people. I know that the international community, and especially the United States, spend a lot of money. A few roads have been built and a few bridges have been repaired, but otherwise everything has remained the same. The vast majority of the Afghans have not had any, it had not affected them positively. They just wonder, where did the money go? Why is America here? They just don't understand it. And I think that one reason why we failed in the we failed in Afghanistan is that we didn't have a good partner in Afghanistan. Karzai and his government are very corrupt. They have stolen most of the money that were sent there to help the country and the people. And they basically, the warlords and drug kingpins came and took over the country and became allies of the United States. And I think that's the trouble. And I think whatever we want to do, if we do want to do something, we cannot do it with this government. It will not help because they are the product of chaos. They have thrived, they have become powerful, they have become rich in chaos. And they believe in chaos. They hate the rule of law. They are afraid of the rule of law. And they will do anything and everything in their power to keep it the way it is.
Let's see who else has questions for Nasir. Feel free to state your name and affiliation if you wish, and we'll go from there. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Anshuman Apte, Voice of America, Afghanistan Service. And as we discussed, I will ask more questions later. But one question about the revelation by Secretary Gates, former Secretary Gates' comments about the Afghan strategy of the present administration. What is your take on that? Because he is clearly indicating that this administration was not fully committed on its own strategy, be it surge or be it, and then the inclination was just to get out. How do you see that?
I think you're right. I think President Obama is fed up with Afghanistan. Nothing what he did really helped out there. I see actually, I'm very pessimistic about what is happening. If the United States and NATO withdraw from Afghanistan, I think we will have an implosion fairly soon. And as I said, there will be civil war, and I think that the Taliban will return, at least to part of Afghanistan. And psychologically, people are already worried about that. And you already see a slide towards fundamentalism. And I think partly it's done because of the fear of the Taliban returning to Afghanistan. I think that, for example, what the segregation of the sexes, it's already very severe. And I don't believe that the present government that's in power now for almost 12 years really ever believed in that. I have never seen, I have been about 42 times to Afghanistan, and in some stretches I stayed there for 3 months. Last time I was there for about a month. I have never seen President Karzai or any of his ministers to sit in a car with their wives and drive from one house to another and visit a friend with his wife. I have never seen their wives in any party, be it a party at an embassy, be it a party at friends' houses. It's really a man's world. The women are exactly like they were under the Taliban, are at home. And as a matter of fact, there was a proposal by the elders of the country, whatever that means, that men had the right to punish their wives if they did something wrong. And that women should not go out alone. And strangely enough, Mr. Karzai, who claims to be a world man of this time, he said that makes sense. It didn't become a law, but the president of the country thought it made sense. And if you go to the countryside, it's exactly the way the Taliban wanted people to live and wanted people to have a relationship to God. I think one of the strengths of the Taliban is that Afghanistan, especially the countryside, is very traditional, very old-fashioned, basically live in the year 1000, I would say. If you took away the few good roads and the few cars, they live in biblical times. They have mud huts, they have no furniture, they have no water, they have no electricity, there's no support for the sick. And I think everybody has been lying to at least here in the United States. I remember in 2009, it was, I think, President Karzai visited the United States officially, and he held a speech at one of the foundations. And he said that 60% of the Afghan people have access to medical services. It's total nonsense. Because 80% of the Afghan people live in the countryside, and there's nothing there for them. So I think it's a tragedy, and I think that the United States has I think one of the problems in having the stamina to fight a war like this is that you have to plan long term. In a democracy like the United States, you can't plan long term, or you don't want to plan long term, because you have to accept, you have to respect public opinion. And public opinion has turned away from Afghanistan because nothing happened. And I understand that completely. Money is a problem. We are spending a lot of money in these wars. So it's understandable, but I don't think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Frank Vogel, and I'm involved with an NGO called Transparency International. Two questions. First, a humanitarian one. Those humanitarian groups that have worked in Afghanistan, mostly NGOs and civil society, on women's issues, and particularly on education and education for girls, feel that they made some progress. And the question really is there any way you believe that that progress can be sustained? That's the first question. The second question is really easy to state and hard to answer. We put into Afghanistan, we the US, $28 million every single day in reconstruction aid. $100 billion since we started there. Far more than in any other country in the world in terms of foreign aid and reconstruction aid. Where do you think that money has actually gone? Thank you. But maybe you could start with the humanitarian one, otherwise you'll forget it.
Yes. I think one of the real problems is that the reporting that comes out of Afghanistan really concentrates only on the cities. Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, Mazar. Yes, there's a certain amount of progress there in terms of women's rights and women being able to do business, to work for the government. The countryside is absolutely wrong. It's not happening in the countryside. So for the greatest majority of the people, I would guess that at least 80% of the people, that has not happened. In Kabul, yes. In Kandahar, less. In Mazar, yes. In Herat, a little bit less. The money, I have no idea where it went to. I can only give you can't see anything that has happened physically. I mean, as I said, a few roads, a few bridges. When you go to Kabul, after 12 years, there's not one single traffic light working. The roads are as broken, the streets are as broken as they were 12 years ago. Most of the buildings are as scarred and dilapidated as they were 12 years ago. The agriculture cannot does not produce anything of importance because we are still talking about 2-3 million Afghans suffering of hunger and being insecure as far as food is concerned. We speak of Afghanistan still as having the largest or one of the largest child mortalities in the world. Where it has gone, I frankly don't know. But I did read a report. There was a study made that about the exact amount in the year 2012, so the report was about 2012, almost exactly the amount that the US and the international community spent in Afghanistan or sent to Afghanistan for investment and for development, almost exactly the same amount left Afghanistan and went to places like Dubai and other places. For a country like Afghanistan, where the per capita income is, let's say, $250 a year, when you transfer $5 billion from the country, that's an enormous amount of money. So a lot of it went to the pockets of people who simply stole everything. And I must say that the American companies and USAID, they call them first prime contractors, they did the same thing. For example, there was a project to build about, I think, 400 schools and medical sites in the countryside. One of the companies, an American company, contracted that, and it was a USAID project, and they immediately subcontracted the whole thing to a Turkish company. They were being paid $500,000 per unit. They subcontracted it immediately for $250,000 to a Turkish company. So they became actually just a check writing organization. They didn't do anything whatsoever. And they got per unit $250,000. And then the Turkish company went and subcontracted it to an Afghan company for $80,000 per unit. And I think out of the 400 schools and medical stations, I think 9 or 10 were ever built. Everybody got paid. Nothing else was built. And nobody actually could control it because USAID sits as sort of prisoners within the embassy. They don't go out and check. You sign a contract, you do so much work and you get so much paid, and you do so much work and you get so much paid. But there's nobody to dare to go and see whether that amount of work has been done. They just rely on the contractors, and the contractors cheat them and they pay. So I don't think that money has really done anything good in general terms, anything good in Afghanistan. It has come back, partly back to the United States and partly to places who don't need money, like Dubai and the Emirates and places like that.
Hi, I'm Jackie Rose. I'm a club member. Thank you for talking to us today. I really appreciate it. I would like to know, I've been looking at some similar issues in terms of the putting in assistance in Haiti. And it's not totally different. It's more of a level of bribery each level. But what would you say if you were looking for some way to fix it? Like, say, next time there's $500 million to go for X many schools or whatever, what kind of methods or things could be done differently that you can think of? I know the security problem is very big. At one point I was thinking of working in Iraq, and I started thinking it would have to do with contracting as a U.S. employee, but I was thinking, how am I going to get around Iraq without security? I would need a gun. Well, I'd need a machine gun too. By the time I thought it through, I never pursued it. But what would you suggest could be done?
I'm not sure. I can't really talk about Haiti. I don't know what's going on there. But in Afghanistan, there's insecurity, no doubt about it. But I believe if you want to do something in Afghanistan and for the people, not for the few rich, not for the foreign companies, but for the people, you have to accept risks. If you can't accept risks, don't go there. I went twice from Kabul to Pakistan by car. I went all alone. I was not armed. I actually took a taxi. I didn't even take my own car and drove to Pakistan. Nothing happened. I came back one time. I was stopped in the middle of the desert, and 3 armed people came and entered my car by force and said we had to drive them somewhere. I knew that it could end badly, so I did what most people, most humans would do. I turned around, they were sitting in the back, the driver was driving, I turned around and I said, I'm Nasir Shansab, hello, how are you? Salaam alaikum. And I shook their hands, they were totally surprised, they didn't know what was happening. And they became so friendly, after 5 minutes they said, stop the car, we are getting out. I stopped the car, they got out. It could have gone wrong. I made a trip through one of the most dangerous routes in Afghanistan. I went through Wardak, which is completely under the control of the Taliban, and to Bamyan, and all the way to the mountains of Hajigak. I had an old man, older, maybe probably younger than I am, but he looked older than I do, and a driver, and I had one handgun, one pistol in the car. I stopped at each small village, went to the chaikhana or went to the mosque, and I said, I want to talk to people. And they would come, we would hug, and they were very friendly. I would ask them what their problems were, and I went all the way there, and I came back. When I came back, they knew that I would come back in 2-3 days because I told them. If I had surprised them the first time around, they were not surprised the second time around. They could have killed me, they could have taken me, God knows what they could have done with me. But they actually had cooked food for me and waited for me to come back. Now, again, this could have gone wrong. Maybe there would be a crazy man with a gun and would have killed me or taken me hostage or whatever. But nothing happened. So I think if you really want to do something, you have to do it right. I'm sure if I had made that trip, and I could have made it because we have our own guards in Afghanistan. I could have taken 20 guards, 2-3 cars, everybody with guns, and stopped at those villages. I think that the villagers would have said, this man hates us. This man does not trust us. So we hate him, and we don't trust him. And that's exactly what's happening. When foreigners travel through Afghanistan, that's the way they travel. They have a number of cars, they have guns, and they get out in a village and say, we want to help you with your health problems. They don't believe him. They think if this man wants to help us, he didn't have to have all the guns with him. And I understand it's a difficult problem, but somewhere down the line, we have to accept responsibility. We have to accept risks, or we shouldn't do it.
A quick follow-up on the security question. What do you think, what do the people think, and then what do you think about the Afghan army? There's been a lot of talk about its progress in terms of building up numbers and its willingness to take on missions. What do you see its prognosis as, and what kind of a situation might that bode for the future?
SIGAR, the Office of the Inspector General for Afghanistan, published a report about a month ago. And they found out, after a very long study, that the literacy rate in the Afghan army is 11%, and in the Afghan police force, about 8%. They found out that the desertion rate is 4% per month. That's almost half the army per year. They come for the money because there are no jobs. They need the money. And they get $250 from the international community, while the Afghanistan cannot pay it. This is actually more than a deputy minister would get. The standard salary of a deputy minister in a ministerium is $70. They stay there, they go through the training, they get their new uniform, they get their Kalashnikov, a clean new Kalashnikov, and then they go. But that's one side of it. The other side of it is that about 70% of the army are Tajiks. Most of the war is being fought in the south where the Pashtuns live, the Pashtun belt. They don't even speak Pashto, the local language. Most educated people speak both. But these people, because they have no education, they lived in their villages. It's the first time that they enter the Pashtun area. They don't even speak the language of the people. My feeling is that as soon as the United States and NATO goes, the sense of insecurity will be so enormous for most of the soldiers stationed in the south that they will take their guns, walk home, and go to the villages. I think that the army will simply collapse and disintegrate. There's another side of the story. Because of the corruption, anybody can go to the Ministry of Defense. I don't know who does it, but that's the way it functions. If you pay, the price for getting a general's uniform with 1 star is $50,000. You pay $50,000, you become a general. And that's an investment they make, because they will be then sent to one of the installations, military installations. There's the money for the gasoline, repair of vehicles, repair of equipment, food for the soldiers, and they steal from everything they get. And in a matter of 2-3 years, the 50,000 is 500,000 or more, and then they can go home. I don't believe that the Afghan army will be able to sustain, to fight this fight. It's impossible. If 150,000 highly trained, heavily armed soldiers could not defeat the insurgency, the 350,000 very lightly armed, mainly illiterate people cannot do the job. It's impossible. And I know that in the press here says they can do it. I frankly don't know. I think I wrote to you. Is it stupidity or misinformation? I have no idea. I don't make a judgment. I don't know.
There are a lot of press reports about the Afghan army doing more.
Yes, yes.
Do you have a question?
Forgive me, but I have 2 questions. Phaedra Hannon, NPC Group. First question is regards of, once we leave, do you think anybody else is going to move back into Afghanistan after other countries decide to come back in? They can't handle seeing what they see. The other one is, I work for foundations. Would you tell foundations not to give any money to Afghanistan? It's a lost cause.
To answer your second question first, I would be very hesitant to say to foundations not to pay money for Afghanistan, because I would love for foundations to give money for Afghanistan. But if they do, they have to do it correctly and control it properly. They have to have people in place there and really control expenditure of each dollar themselves. If they don't do it, it's better not to do it, if they don't control themselves. The other question, sorry, can you remind me of that first one?
NATO and U.S. moves out.
Yeah, NATO is mainly Europe. Europe, in my view, does not have the determination to go into far-off countries and militarily and do the job. I think that the notion of peacefulness is very strong in Europe. Their military budgets are very, very small. Without the United States, I don't think they have the political will to do it, and I don't think they would have the military wherewithal to do it. So if you talk about interference or helping out in far-off countries like Afghanistan, I think without the United States, it's impossible. No European would go on its own to do that.
Betty Plummer, NPC member. This is kind of a follow-up to that question. Since Russia or the Soviet Union was in your country for some 8 years, and now the U.S. in that country for some 12 years, what do you see as the motivation or the reasons for the United States even wanting to be in your country? A lot of us, I think, are wondering that. We're seeing only confusion and no clear direction.
I think it was a mistake to go to Afghanistan. But the mistake we made started early on. I think Afghanistan has never been conquered. It's called the graveyard of empires. And to a certain extent, that's true. Not that the Afghans are supermen. We are not. We experience pain, we experience fear. But there are two things that I think help the Afghans to win in a war in their own country. One is the abject poverty. They have nothing to lose, number one. For an Afghan to go to war is easy. His children have no access to school or to medical support. He has no water. He has no toilet facilities of any sort. He eats a warm meal maybe once a week, and most of them eat a warm meal only twice a month. For him to get angry, if he does get angry, and the Afghans do get angry, he just takes his gun and goes to the mountains and kill a few people. It's very easy for them. That's, I think, one reason. The other reason is the Afghan topography. You can't do much with a modern army in Afghanistan. Number one, if you go into a desert, you can't sustain a big army, big numbers of soldiers, because there's nothing there. There's no infrastructure. There's no water. There's no electricity. There's no place to go and warm yourself. So you have to fly in everything. Even a bottle of water has to be flown in. It becomes very expensive and very difficult. Secondly, in the mountainous area, and most of the wars happen in the mountainous areas, you really can't do with big machines. The big machines don't go there. So you have to ask your soldiers, with all the equipment they have, and the big boots they have, to go and walk the mountains. They can't do it. The Afghans are accustomed to it. They are very lightly armed. I have traveled with Afghan warriors in Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion. I always had to beg them to stop and let us rest. And I'm exercising. I'm in fairly good shape, at least I think. And they know how to walk. They are thin. They don't eat a lot of sugar. They don't gain weight, and they don't have cars, so they have to walk, and they know how to walk. It's almost impossible to beat them. in their own countryside. They know the mountains, they know the passages. They can walk for 8 hours without stopping. It's impossible for a modern army to go and survive there.
Skip Kaltenhauser, I'm a writer in town. You've been involved in a couple major projects, efforts to get them off the ground in Afghanistan. Could you give a nutshell of them and your conclusions as to the level of oversight, quality of oversight that resulted?
Initially in the year 2000, when this rush of doing projects in Afghanistan started, a company from Britain was hired. They checked the project. They designed the specification, and they wrote the bids. And I must tell you, my company in Afghanistan was very, very successful. We won almost most of the bids because we knew how the World Bank, most of the money, most of this was done in a World Bank situation. Project like when the international community went to Afghanistan, the government had nothing. So one of the projects that the World Bank paid for was to give the government in Afghanistan, not just in Kabul but nationwide, vehicles. So we had to make a study. We won the project. We had to make a study what type of cars they need and how many. And we won the project, and we did it. And the police, the army, the ministers, the deputy ministers, everybody had to have a car there. And we did, for example, they brought in, they had to bring in machinery, heavy machinery to repair the roads. And those machines were too big to be transported to Afghanistan. So they had to come in disassembled. And we bid for that we would bring the machines and assemble them in Afghanistan. We immediately trained people. By the time the machine came, we were ready. We had all the tools, and we assembled those machines. And I think those machines are still working in Afghanistan. And we gave them two-year warranty, and repaired them whenever was necessary for those 2 years. What happened in the year, I think 2005, there was a conference in London. The Afghan government insisted that they would have to have the last say in contracting, in giving contracts. From that time onwards, and the international community accepted that. From that time onwards, my company never won a bid. And the reason was because we didn't bribe. To give you an example, and I must say, unfortunately, that I think that the American company that was involved there was partly responsible. Electricity became an important matter, and they wanted to build a power plant outside Kabul to give Kabul electricity because Kabul had almost no electricity. I proposed to the this was again USAID, and they had contracted a company that would do the preparation and what type of things they wanted to do, and they approved me. I gave them all my information, what I wanted to do, and they approved me for that project. But a very powerful politician here in Washington, I don't want to mention the name right now, maybe we'll do it sometimes in a piece of writing. I wanted to bring in machines, very slow running machines, 500 RPM, very large machines that you have in big ships, and those machines would run on almost raw oil. And my project, the cost of my project was $105 million. With everything, it was a turnkey project. the machines were from Germany, MAN. It's the only company that actually makes these machines. MAN has a representative in the United States. The gentleman from Washington has a company in Texas, and he got interested in that project. They pressured the representative of MAN here. They said, in Afghanistan, you may sell these two machines to produce 150 or 200 megawatts. But here in the United States, you sell 20 machines a year. Don't give him the machines. The day the bids had to be submitted, in the evening, I got a call from the director of the company in Germany. And he said, we can't deliver you the machines. And I failed to submit my bid. He was very apologetic and indirectly explained it to me this way. Ultimately, that project cost the US taxpayer, I think, $225 million. The machines, they brought in smaller machines that ran on diesel oil. USAID ran the plant for a year. It cost, I think, $2.5 million a month to run them, just for the diesel. And ultimately, USAID said, well, we paid for it, and we ran it for a year. Now you have to take over. And the Afghan government had no money. So it's that plant is locked for the last 5-6 years. Doesn't run in Kabul. And the international community pays, the Asian Development Bank paid $120 million to connect Kabul with Tajikistan, build overland lines. And the international community pays Tajikistan to feed Kabul with electricity. And when the international community leaves, the Afghan government does not have the money to pay Tajikistan for electricity, so that would stop. And Kabul would have no electricity like it didn't have 12 years ago. One example. The other example. The iron ore, Afghanistan has one of the largest iron ore mines in the world. And it's a very rich iron ore mine because the Fa content is about 62%. In most iron ore mines, for example, in Australia, the Fa content is about maximum 38%. And the Afghan mine is 62%. So they wanted to sell the rights for this thing. The World Bank gave, I think, $50 million to the Ministry of Mines to hire a company to prepare the bids, what should be done and how the bidding should take place. A company from the United States was hired, and they did all the paperwork and everything was fine. It was a copy of World Bank systems. They presented the Afghan side presented the project in New York, where the Minister of Finance was, the Afghan Minister of Finance was there, the Afghan Minister of Mines was there, the Deputy Secretary of State was there, of the United States. USAID, I think it was a USAID project, they arranged it, and I was there. They presented this case. And I decided in 2007 not to do business in Afghanistan because I didn't want to be involved in the corruption. So I went to the Minister of Finance, and I said, are you going to do this, this going to be a corrupt business and nepotistic business? He gave me his word that it would not be. And I decided to bid for it. I raised $1.2 billion, billion with a B, and made a proposal that I thought was a good proposal. And not only for me and my partners, but for the people of Afghanistan, especially for the local people. They got 6 bidders. I think 2 from Iran, 2 from India, 1 from Canada, and our bid. All the bids were non-performing. except ours. The reason why all the bids were non-performing was the heart of the bidding was to present an exact technical plan. What you want to do from day one till you produce steel. And you had to produce steel, that was the condition. And the second point was that you had to produce funds and show how you can pay for it. The only bid that had exact technical plans from day one to the end of the project was our bid. The only bid that showed money, we had a certification that there was $1.2 billion ready for this project. Not that we had it or had it at our disposal. We had it for this project. That was 2 years ago, by the way. Slightly, it was September of last year was the bid opening. And at the end of the, and it was, they had to decide on it by December 2000, well, what was it, 2011, and signed the contract in January of 2012. No contract has been signed because they chose the Indians. And the Indians still today produce no money. They failed till today to say where's the money. And the reason why they didn't sign the contract, they would have signed the contract by January. Nobody would have thought about it. Nobody would have talked about it. Nobody would have found out. And the minister would have been gone by the time civil war starts. And would have probably bought himself a nice place in London in a nice car. He used to be in London, and I think he lived in a very rundown part of the city, and I don't know exactly what he did, but I think he was ambitious enough to say, I'm going to live in that part of the city, and I'm not going to have a Toyota Corolla second-hand. I have to have a Bentley in front of the house. So they did what they did. Until today, that's not signed because I objected. I raised hell. If I had not raised hell, and you raised hell, this would have been already signed and gone. So that project is still open. This time when I went to Afghanistan, and I went to the commission, to the Senate commission, and we talked about it. I have been promised that as soon as the new minister, organizes himself, I can come back and present my project again, and I hope I will win it. So this is all. What was told to me in the 2 years that this is going on, the Minister of Mines and some of his assistants made some 10 visits to India. And we don't know what he did there in India. But he made trips to India, and World Bank money paid for all those trips. And World Bank money is also your money, because the United States is the largest shareholder of the World Bank. And I heard that each time when they went to Delhi, they stayed at a 5-star hotel, and as soon as they came and registered, there was a gentleman and would hand over envelopes. The envelope was full of cash so that they could spend money in Delhi. And because we have segregation of sexes, sex is an enormous problem. You don't see women. You get frightened when you see a woman. So, and the Indians apparently know that, and they apparently, I can't vouch for it, but apparently, that's what I heard, they would get first-rate the prostitutes sent to the rooms in the night. And of course, that was probably just the initial down payment, and there was probably some good money promised after the signature of signing the contract. So here's a very large project that would feed the government of Afghanistan, pay the government of Afghanistan something like $500 to $800 million a year. Employs directly some 10 to 15,000 people, indirectly probably another 40,000 people. Would bring in hard currency in terms of $1 billion or $2 billion. But it's not signed because there's no incentive for the minister and for the government to sign it. So they're not going to sign it until you force them. And the sad part of the story is that among the people who checked all these documents, there are, I think, 4 or 5 USAID people. Mr. Thea, and I need to tell this name. Mr. Thea was then, he's no longer, the assistant director of USAID for Afghanistan and Pakistan. He had a speech at the New American Foundation. I was watching late at night. I was watching TV and I was watching C-SPAN, and by accident I saw it. And he talked about what USAID does in Afghanistan, in transparency, and as an example of a transparent and clean deal, he mentioned Haji Cap. I wrote him a letter the next day, and I told him that I would disagree, and whether he could tell me. Maybe I said I'm wrongly informed. Maybe he can tell me. He never answered me. I pressed him very hard. Ultimately, I got an answer by one of his staff, and he just begged me to not pursue this matter again. So. Transparency, I mean, this country, why does this country to change when they go to Afghanistan? The unfortunate thing is that when you go to places like that, even we change. You say, oh, let's do it. Why not? I have no idea what interest he had to do it. The only thing that I can think of is that we have always appeased Karzai. The reason we have always appeased Karzai is that we are afraid of trouble in Afghanistan. So they think if we don't appease, fight Karzai and he goes away or he falls, then there will be trouble and we cannot control it. Fear, nothing but fear.
You had a question, right?
Edwin Mora with Breitbart News. Can you talk about how the opium production problem threatens stability and the U.S. victory in Afghanistan?
I think that the opium business is part of the corrupt system in Afghanistan. I think it has partly criminalized the business and life in Afghanistan. And I think once the international community leaves Afghanistan, it will completely probably criminalize life in Afghanistan. It's an enormous danger for the country. It's an enormous danger for the people. It's a very, very sad story.
Hi, Glenn Marcus, Public Television, and Johns Hopkins University. What about Pakistan? Their role, et cetera, et cetera. You've danced around various issues.
Yes. I mentioned before, I think, that when things went wrong in Afghanistan, it started fairly early on. And the Soviet army left Afghanistan in 1989. It took the resistance about 2 years, 2.5 years, to topple the local communists in Afghanistan. When the resistance took over Afghanistan, they started an enormous civil war, a very savage and destructive civil war. And the United States at that time turned away from that part of the world. I think it turned away from most of the Third World because new opportunities opened up, especially in Eastern Europe. The US felt that in Eastern Europe, where you had a well-educated people, where you had a good, solid basis of industries, where you had a modern society, people who thought like the year 2000, whatever it was, or 1900, whatever it was. And you had a European culture. So they concentrated there and neglected, among other places, Afghanistan. They had no stomach for going back to Afghanistan and doing something, but they also felt, Washington also felt, that something had to be done in Afghanistan because it was too bad. So what Washington did was it subcontracted Pakistan and Saudi Arabia to do the job. And Pakistan said, we will do it. What Pakistan did was they hired hundreds of thousands of young Afghans who lived in Pakistan and had grown up in Pakistan in the camps and had gone to these religious-based madrasas that the Saudis had built and where a very intolerant, the Wahhabi system was taught, a very intolerant, enormously rigid system of religion. These people didn't know anything from the world in their camps and the madrasas. They were trained to go to Afghanistan and free Afghanistan. And it was very successful because the Afghans suffered enormously because of that civil war. And they came with a white flag and the Quran in the hand and said, we are going to bring peace to Afghanistan. And they basically walked through Afghanistan. Nobody really fought them. And of course, the Pakistan, to come back to Pakistan, the Pakistani army was part of it because they actually went to Kabul. They had vehicles, they had tanks and heavy machinery. Illiterate people who have never had access to operate these things, they can't do it. Somebody has to do it for them. Somebody has to bring them the fuel to drive on. Somebody has to feed them while they are moving forward. So Pakistan was an integral part of this system. Pakistan has a psychological problem. They believe that India is their ultimate enemy and that India wants to destroy Pakistan. Rightly or wrongly, that's what they think. And as long as they fear war with India, they are very much afraid, they have always been very much afraid of a two-front war. They are afraid that Afghanistan, that has never accepted, I think foolishly, the present border, that Afghanistan would invade Pakistan from the other side and they would have to fight a two-front war. So they came with the idea of a strategic depth. Pakistan is a long country, but a fairly narrow country, slim country. If you were to fly, if an Indian were to fly a MiG today, it can cross Pakistan over in 6 minutes. So it can, in a matter of minutes, they can bombard anything in Pakistan. So the Pakistani army came up with the idea of a strategic depth. Now, the strategic depth is basically nothing else but Afghan territory. They have decided that they have to have a weak Afghanistan, a government that cannot function and would always rely on Pakistani support to function. And that's part of it why Pakistan did that. Saudi Arabia, why did Saudi Arabia pay for it? And the money came from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I think, is very much worried about the very aggressive and expansionist Shia fundamentalism in Iran. They thought they could counterbalance Iran with a fundamentalist, Sunni fundamentalist country, Afghanistan. At least that's the way I would interpret it. So the US did what it did, and it was okay. And I remember that once the Taliban had not even taken Kabul. They were still fighting to go to Kabul. The Minister of Interior of Pakistan took the American ambassador, the French ambassador, the German ambassador, and the British ambassador in a helicopter and landed them in Kandahar and said, it's all free for you, it's all there. and they brought in, and I think it was all staged, trucks full of goods. They said now they can go to the road to Central Asia is open, and everybody was impressed and everybody liked it. And I think that the Taliban, basically Pakistan, should have read Goethe's Wolfgang Goethe's poem, what was it? I don't remember the title. The Day at the Gods. They created a monster that is now turning around and destroying Pakistan itself.
I'm Jeremy Kay. Sorry.
The
Nasir's publisher.
The man who dared to publish my book.
Given the Shansab name in Afghanistan and its reputation and your personal reputation in Afghanistan, have you given any consideration to taking an active political role in the country?
I don't think, I mean, it may be not proper to say it, but I think I would be able to do a better job than Karzai did, at least. So the name is fairly known in Afghanistan, but not because of me. The first reason is that the oldest piece of poetry that exists in the Pashto language was written by one of my forefathers. And so anyone who passes through 9th grade reads that poetry, and so gets to know the name. When I read the poem the first time myself, I thought he was, my forefather was glorifying God. And then I was hurt. I heard people explained it to me. He was not glorifying God, he was glorifying himself. And I think in more modern times, my father was one of the first to go to Europe to study, and he had a PhD in electrical engineering from a German university. And he built a small power plant in Kandahar, the first power plant over there that's still functioning. He built a large hydroelectric power plant in the north that's still functioning. He built a textile factory in the north that's still functioning very badly, but still functioning. He built the largest industrial plant in Afghanistan, which is the Gulbahar plant, which is locked up. It survived the war, but it's locked up. I don't know. I went to Afghanistan in 2002, and one of the projects I wanted to do was to take this factory and modernize it and bring it back to life. At that time, when it was running 24 hours a day, and it employed 8,000 people directly. And the way he built it, it is exactly the way we would build something like that today. He built a very modern, huge mosque, not because he went to mosque every day, he didn't, but because the people went to mosque. And he built a movie theater, he built a school, he built, I think, 50 small houses for management, and about 1,000 small units for the workers. He built, there were two tennis courts in a very large pool. I used to swim in that when I was a small boy. So he did a lot of work, and that's probably why they know the name also, more recently. I haven't done anything at all. I got my genes from my parents, and some of the wealth from my father and forefather. So I did very well. I didn't have to do anything much.
Well, but really, to be too modest, because you do have a reputation in the the reaction of average Afghans to you and your name is fairly obvious, and I've been able to experience that. So, but as a follow-up, kind of in that same line, so given how you sort of feel that the country's going to disintegrate in rapid order when we leave, how do you intend to pursue a project like this mining project if in fact you win the bid?
I had a long conference call with the people who have agreed to fund this project. And strangely enough, they said that they are still interested. I think that most private investors will not go to Afghanistan, and rightly so. And I think if I had not been born in Afghanistan and had not this strange affection for the country and the people, I would have not gone. Because it sounds foolish to go and spend and invest $1 billion or more in a country where you don't know what will happen there. But I think that whoever takes over Afghanistan, I think if we talk to them and if we are able to convince them that we don't mean harm, that we want to do something good, I think people will listen. This is what I've seen in Afghanistan, and I'm ready to take that risk. I'll give you a very small example of what I did in the year 2002, if we still have time. I formed a company to do what we talked about, and I installed a very young man from a Hazara, which is they are in two senses a minority in Afghanistan. They look Central Asian, so you see that that's a minority. And they are Shias, and Shias are a minority in Afghanistan. But he was very intelligent, very well educated. He knew a little bit of English. He was perfect with computers. I installed him as my office manager. He was responsible for everybody else. There were two elderly men among the people we had in the company. One of them was, they were both Pashtuns. One of them had worked for some of our companies before the wars. So there was always tension between these two people and the young Hazara boy. And ultimately, the two came and said, we can't take an order from him. Whatever you have to do, we will do, but you tell us. I said, but I have other things to do. And they wouldn't listen. So I assembled, we were a small company then, assembled some 50 people or so. I took this young man in my arms, and I said, look, this is an Hazara, and he's also Shia, and he's only 29 years old. But he is your boss. You either accept it or you have to leave. They all accepted it. And they all worked together very, very well. It depends. I mean, people are people. If they think that they can do something, that it's in their benefit to do it, that you do something good for them, no matter where they are and who they are and how intelligent they are or how educated they are, they understand that. And that's what I'm banking on. Maybe foolishly, but that's what I'm banking on.
I understand we have time for one more, if there is one.
I'd just like your opinion. Do you feel that America has done well for Afghanistan? Not well? Failed Afghanistan? How do you feel?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
How do you feel about America in Afghanistan? Did they fail? Were they a B, a C, a D? How do you feel?
I think if I think if the United States doesn't take a drastic step, it has already failed. I think the war is already going. It's going to be a failure.
And was it a failure the whole time?
It was a failure the whole time. We made too many mistakes. It doesn't look good. But if you want to get out of there with our heads high, I think the U.S. has to take a very, very strong step, which I think is going to be to abolish the system of government, install a temporary interim government of non-political people, of technocrats, clean up the police, clean up the courts, rebuild the institutions, and introduce democracy again, because people now think that democracy is something that the West have brought simply to control us. Reintroduce what democracy actually means, because they totally misunderstand it now with all what has happened. And then perhaps give it 2-3 years. Perhaps then you can have elections and release this troubled country into the family of nations, at least as a peaceful country, and having an economy that can stand on its feet. You can't make a Switzerland out of it. That might take another 200 years.
Great stopping point.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for coming today. By all means, pick up a copy of Nasir's book, Silent Trees. It's complimentary to you. And we'll be happy to make Nasir available for follow-up interviews at any time. I think you'll agree that he has a wealth of knowledge and information that you don't tend to hear quite often in this country about his home country. Obviously has a deep love for his people, and we have a deep love for Nasir, and he's a great American and a wonderful member of the Allen Media Strategies family. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you very much.